Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Today is explanation of Renegade Immortal episode number 55 based on novel. So let's start. In this past year, Wang Lin had tried multiple times to carve a person or spirit beast that was at the soul formation level, but they all failed. If he forced himself to complete the carving, then the carving would turn into dust. He pondered a little with his eyes closed. Suddenly, a red substance about 1 palm thick appeared around him. The red substance was the evil aura that had been condensed a lot by Wang Lin this past year. Wang Lin was very satisfied with the result. He actually didn't forcefully condense the evil aura, it just naturally happened thanks to his actions. Wang Lin believed that in just 1 more year, he will be able to compress this evil aura to its limit. Getting rid of this evil aura won't raise his cultivation level though. But Wang Lin always believed that if he just lets this evil aura disappear, he will regret it in the future. It was the instinct of a cultivator that knows that they might need something in the future that made Wang Lin decide to condense the evil aura. Nyo's father's voice came in from outside. "Brother Wang, your sister-in-law has made a few good dishes today. Come over and eat, then us brothers can drink a few cups." Wang Lin's eyes suddenly opened, revealing an ancient light. The light slowly disappeared and Wang Lin went back to being a normal person. He held the jug, walked 2 steps, then hesitated for a bit before grabbing some gold from the basket, and walked out. As for that young man named Shu, he was currently sitting in his carriage. His heart was pounding as he held the package in his hands. His eyes were filled with excitement. He didn't think that his visit home to see his parents would allow him to meet a person that could create this kind of wood carving. It can be said that the king's only hobby was to collect these kinds of things. Whether it was made of stone or wood, it didn't matter what kind of material. As long it was a sculpture, the king liked them. And the prince was a very filial son. If he brings this to the prince, he will be well rewarded. Thinking about it, the young man named Shu took a deep breath. This team of more than 10 carriages moved quickly through the capital, but he still wished they could go faster so he could return to the palace sooner. After a long time, the carriage stopped. The young man named Shu quickly opened the door and rushed into the palace. In the eastern courtyard, the young man stopped before a very elegant building and said, "Prince, Shu Dao wishes to meet you for an important matter." After a while, a lazy voice came from the building saying, "Shu Dao, didn't you go home to visit your relatives? How come you're back so early? If there is anything, we can talk tomorrow." Shu Dao was able to vaguely hear some charming and tempting voices from the palace. He hesitated for a bit. Normally, it would really not be a good time to bother the prince, but he was very confident with the item he was holding. He clenched his teeth and said, "Prince, I really do have an important matter. When I was on my way home, I found a wood carving. If the king saw this wood carving, he would definitely be happy." Silence came from the building. After a while, a dissatisfied voice came from inside. "Come in then, but if this item isn't as good as you say, then you're losing this month's pay." Shu Dao quickly walked into the palace and saw a giant bed covered by a veil. A slightly pale young man sat at the edge of the bed. His eyes were slightly gloomy. Shu Dao placed his coat on the ground, then carefully opened it up, revealing the dragon carving within. The moment the young man saw the wood carving, his eyes suddenly became sharp. He stood up and quickly walked up to the wood carving. He reached out and grabbed the carving with his right hand. Just as Shu Dao was about to warn the youth, he suddenly heard the youth yell. The youth waved his hand and the wood carving disappeared. He said, "Good. Shu Dao, you have done a great service." With that, he slapped a broken-looking bag that hung on his waist. Suddenly, a wave of purple gas came out of the bag and surrounded the youth. The gas dissipated and the youth was now wearing a purple robe. The moment the purple gas appeared, a breeze blew through the room, lifting up the veil a bit. 2 charming screams came from the bed as the veil revealed 2 beautiful bodies. Shu Dao's eyes involuntarily looked over. He swallowed hard and averted his gaze, not daring to look. The young wasn't a mortal, but a cultivator. However, his cultivation level wasn't high. He was only at the 8th layer of qi condensation. He looked at Shu Dao and noticed Shu Dao's gaze. He laughed and said, "My Ji, come out. Today, you belong to Shu Dao." A charming response came from the bed as a beautiful figure walked out of the bed. She leisurely walked over, grabbed the dumbfounded Shu Dao, and left with him through the side door. The young man's eyes lit up and he quickly left the palace. The youth walked straight to the central palace. When he was outside of the doors, he heard bursts of song and music along with his father's laughter coming from inside. Outside the hall stood rows of guards. When they saw the prince, they all dropped to one knee. The young man quickly walked past them and into the main hall. Inside the hall were 2 small tables with a cultivator sitting behind each one. The cultivators were wearing different colored robes, one black and one green. The cultivator in black's eyes remained closed. He had no interest in music and dance. The green-robed cultivator was smiling as he watched the singers and dancers perform. Above the main hall sat a very handsome middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was very majestic and had the look of a ruler. After the young man entered the hall, the middle-aged man laughed and said, "Why are you not having fun in the Pink Palace? Why did you come here to your old man?" The young man first respectfully greeted the 2 cultivators, then looked at the middle-aged man and said, "Father, please look at this." With that, he took out the dragon carving and placed it on the ground. At that moment, the green-robed cultivator, who was looking at the performers, suddenly locked his gaze on the carving. The middle-aged man's eyes also lit up. He waved his hand and all of the performers quickly scattered and left. The green-robed cultivator suddenly stood up and walked up to the wood carving. He carefully looked at the carving, took a deep breath, and said, "This is," he already had a guess in his heart, but he wasn't sure. The black-robed man, who always had his eyes closed, opened his eyes and slowly said, "This is a wood carving." The green-robed man before the wood carving was startled. He then wryly smiled and said, "Senior apprentice brother, I know that this is a wood carving. I'm referring to what this is a carving of." The black-robed cultivator that was addressed as senior apprentice brother pondered for a bit and slowly said, "I have not seen it before." The green-robed cultivator bitterly smiled. He was used to this senior apprentice brother's strangeness. The middle-aged man stared at the wood carving and smiled. "2 immortal elders, is there anything special about this carving?" The green-robed cultivator near the wood carving grabbed the wood carving. He suddenly felt an ancient aura come at him. This aura was very powerful and caused him to be shocked. With his mid-stage foundation establishment cultivation, he felt as if his foundation was about to collapse. Horrified, he quickly let go of the carving. His senior apprentice brother waved his sleeves and the carving flew into his hand. This cultivator's face suddenly turned pale as his core became unstable. It took a long time before he was able to control the fluctuations in his core again. The higher the cultivation level you have, the more affected you would be by Wang Lin's carving, but if you were immortal, then the effect would be small. The black-robed man slowly said, "This object is not a normal carving. The creature that is carved is almost exactly the same as the dragon in the ancient record of our sect." The green-robed cultivator said, with a strange expression, "Senior apprentice brother, didn't you say earlier that you've never seen it before? How come you are saying it is a dragon now?" The black-robed cultivator looked surprisedly at the green-robed cultivator. His eyes were filled with astonishment as he said, "Junior apprentice brother, I finally understand why your cultivation hasn't had a breakthrough yet." The green-robed cultivator's face twitched. He didn't say anything. The black-robed cultivator sighed and said, "I have never seen the beast that is carved, but I never said I didn't recognize what it was." The green-robed cultivator's Dao heart wasn't stable enough, so he coughed out a mouthful of blood. After a long time, he calmed himself and bitterly laughed. He felt like he really couldn't deal with this senior apprentice brother of his at all. It was night and there was no moon. Wang Lin lied on the bed in the back of the store. There was a jug of wine beside him. He picked up the jug and took a drink. Wang Lin could feel that in this past year, he has managed to get rid of his mentality as a cultivator and has become more like a mortal. Take this for example, he rarely cultivates at all now, but that would have been impossible before. In those 400 years of escaping and killing, he almost always had his spiritual energy surging in his body and would use any spare time he could find to raise his cultivation level. His life was filled with deadly schemes and life-threatening dangers. If he was a bit less careful, he would have died. He had never before lied down like this and slept. He spent most nights cultivating. That type of life was very exciting and filled with passion, but it was filled with regret. It had no balance. That life was missing something. Now, there were no conflicts in Wang Lin's life. Although it was a bit boring, it was cleansing Wang Lin's soul. Wang Lin felt very strange when he first noticed this feeling, but he gradually accepted it and continued living the life of a mortal. He picked up the jug and downed a gulp. Then, he suddenly frowned. At that moment, 2 cultivators arrived outside his store. Their 2 bodies floated toward his shop like ghosts. One of them waved his hand and Wang Lin's store's main door silently opened. The 2 of them quickly entered. The door was closed by the wind. Inside the shop, the 2's eyes lit up as they looked at all of the carvings inside the shop. Their eyes were filled with terror, But that terror was soon replaced with endless greed. There are so many magic treasures. One of the cultivators sucked in a cold breath of air. He grabbed one of the carvings and looked at it. His body trembled and he quickly threw the carving away. The greed inside his eyes became even stronger. He waved his hand and all of the carvings on the shelves entered his bag of holding. The other cultivator squatted down and searched through a box in the corner. Then, he let out a shout as he held an incomplete carving. His expression became strange as he felt a sweetness in his throat and coughed out a mouthful of blood. He quickly threw away the carving in his hand and backed up as if the carving was an ancient beast. In fact, it was no surprise he couldn't withstand the carving. This was an incomplete carving of 6 Desire Devil Lord. Although it was incomplete, the spiritual pressure inside the carving was that of a late-stage nascent soul cultivator. With this person's core formation cultivation, there was no way he could withstand it. Good thing he quickly let go and the spiritual pressure of the carving hadn't truly awakened. He wouldn't have lost only a simple mouthful of blood otherwise. As the wood carving fell, it was caught by a giant invisible hand, which placed it in Wang Lin's hand. Wang Lin walked out of the back room. He casually put the carving on a shelf, then took a gulp of wine and said, "That is a total of 4,520 gold. Pay up." When Wang Lin appeared, the two suddenly stopped and stared at Wang Lin with horrified expressions. In particular, the cultivator that was just injured by the spiritual pressure in the carving. His face was pale and his forehead was covered in sweat. In their eyes, Wang Lin's appearance was too strange. Before the two of them entered the shop, they used their spiritual energy to check the inside. Although there was one person in the back room, it was only a mortal. But now, the mortal in their eyes appeared silently before them. It was as if a bolt of lightning had just struck them, causing them to be terrified. Adding to the wood carving magic treasures, even if the two of them were dumb, they would have realized that the person before them was a senior they couldn't afford to mess with. The two of them looked at each other and respectfully said, "Greetings, senior. Juniors are disciples of the White Cloud sect. Juniors have been rude and hope senior will forgive us." Wang Lin plainly asked, "Do you have 4,520 pieces of gold?" The two of them looked at each other. They were cultivators, so if it was spirit stones, they would have some, but they really didn't have much gold used by mortals right now. Of course, if they were given time to prepare, they would be able to prepare 4,000, or even 40,000. Wang Lin realized what the two were thinking and sighed. He waved his hand and the bag of holding containing the carvings flew into his hand. He casually swiped his hand across the bag of holding and the owner of the bag forcibly swallowed a mouthful of blood. The respect in the cultivator's eyes became even deeper as that swipe wiped out his divine sense from the bag. Wang Lin shook the bag and all of the carvings flew back to their original places without any error. It was as if they were never moved in the first place. "Go back. When you come again, bring enough gold." With that, Wang Lin waved his hand and the bag of holding flew back to the cultivator. Then, the two of them were pushed by a powerful force toward the door. When they were about to hit the door opened and the two of them were pushed out of the store. This one push pushed them more than 10 kilometers before they finally stabilized themselves. Their eyes revealed unimaginable horror and shock. In their eyes, that youth's cultivation was too powerful for them to measure. The two pondered a little and thought themselves to be very lucky. With that, they quickly left. These two cultivators were the two from the palace. They noticed the abnormality in the carving, so they went and found Shu Dao, who was enjoying himself, and found out about this store. But after what just happened, they were simply too scared to have any more ideas about that store. The two of them didn't know that Wang Lin had already left his divine sense on them. If they had any malicious thoughts about Wang Lin, they would be killed immediately. In fact, if the two of them knew about Wang Lin, then they would feel extremely lucky. If it was the Wang Lin from 1 year ago, the only result of that situation would have been death. Wang Lin sat inside the store. He drank a gulp of wine and sighed. "I haven't killed anyone in a year." With that, he walked back to the back room and went to sleep. Time quickly passed and 2 years passed by. This was already the 3rd year that Wang Lin had been at the capital. Nyo grew even taller and sturdier and more neighbors moved in. The Kong fabric shop's owner died due to illness and the shop was sold to someone else. Nyo's parents' faces gained some light wrinkles. Although they were still young, they couldn't avoid the passage of time. It is worth mentioning that during these 2 years, many of the neighbors had come to Wang Lin to talk about marriage, but they were rejected by Wang Lin each time. The Shu family's second son had already gotten married and had a healthy baby. Shu Dao came back to pay his respects to Wang Lin. He gave Wang Lin 100 pieces of gold, saying it was from the prince. Actually, in these 2 years, during each new year, Shu Dao would bring a lot of gold and silver. As for this matter, Wang Lin didn't reject him. He accepted it all. Autumn passed and winter came. The sun came and went. During these past 2 years, Wang Lin saw the birth of the young and the death of the old. He felt very wistful. In these 2 years, he had only cultivated twice. He no longer cared about his cultivation level and rarely checked it anymore. As for the red substance, only a thin layer remained. The rest had been condensed into 3 red beads, which were stored in his bag of holding. According to his analysis, when the 4th bead is created, the red substance will be all gone. The 2 cultivators from back then had only come once in these 2 years. After handing over a large amount of mortal gold, they took 3 wood carvings. In these 2 years, Wang Lin's store had gained some fame in the western part of the city. Although there weren't a lot of customers, it was still much better than his first year. However, the most common visitors to Wang Lin's shop weren't mortals, but cultivators. 6 out of 10 people that came would be a cultivator. Every cultivator that came would buy wood carvings with mortal gold. In these 2 years, he sold quite a few wood carvings and had gathered a lot of gold and silver. The fact that there was someone amazing in the western part of the capital gradually gained some fame among cultivators. Wang Lin's heart was still calm. What he wanted was still to experience the life of a mortal. The store was just a tool to experience it, and the wood carvings were the same. It was about to be a new year and the capital had become very lively. Wang Lin walked out of his store and sat down outside. His eyes were filled with longing. This was the 3rd new year he had experienced since he arrived at the capital. Each time, this experience was different, except for one thing, the regret he felt toward his childhood. Da Nyo ran out from the ironworks shop from across the street with fireworks in his hand and happily played with them. Upon seeing Da Nyo, happiness appeared in Wang Lin's eyes. Wang Lin had watched this kid grow up from an 11-year-old kid to a 14-year-old youth. Last year, Da Nyo was unable to refuse his dad anymore and began to learn ironworks. However, whenever he had time, he would come and watch Wang Lin make wood carvings. Although Da Nyo didn't come as often, the 1 jug of fruit wine a day never stopped. Playing with the fireworks, Da Nyo ran toward Wang Lin and sat down on the cold bench. He didn't seem to mind the cold. He winked at Wang Lin and said, "Uncle Wang, I heard from my dad a few days ago that shopkeeper Lu from the east side of the city wanted to marry his daughter to you. Why didn't you agree? I have secretly seen her before and she is very beautiful." Wang Lin smiled. He rubbed Da Nyo's head and said, "Uncle already has a wife, really? How come I have never seen her?" Da Nyo suddenly stood up. His face was filled with shock. "She is in a very far away place, waiting for me. One day, I'll go and find her." Wang Lin's voice was gentle as the image of a woman appeared in his mind. Da Nyo let out a mischievous smile. He said, "I understand. Uncle Wang, you came to the capital to make money so you can go back home to get married." Wang Lin smiled and said, "That's right. Once uncle has made a lot of money, he will go back and get married." Da Nyo was about to speak when his father called him. Da Nyo responded and said to Wang Lin, with a bitter smile, "I have to do ironworks again." With that, he helplessly returned home. From inside the ironworks shop came a few shouts from Da Nyo's father. Wang Lin took a sip of the wine and continued to sit outside. Slowly, snow began to fall and this year's first snow silently appeared. The temperature suddenly dropped. The snowflakes hit Wang Lin's face and quickly turned into ice water. Wang Lin raised his head and looked at the dim sky. He raised his hand and casually closed it. All of the snowflakes started to gather toward him. Wang Lin took a deep breath and released his right hand. The snowflakes immediately scattered and drifted in all directions. This happened so quickly that none of the mortals noticed it as they quickly walked through the streets with their heads down. As the sky darkened, there were less and less people walking around. Soon, there was no one left on the street. Even all the shops had closed down due to the cold. Everyone had gone home to their families to gather around the stove. This type of warmth, besides the physical warmth, also warmed the soul. This type of warmth from being with the family could expel any coldness. Slowly, sadness filled Wang Lin's eyes. The coldness that the snow brought was really nothing to him, but at this moment, when he looked at all of the lights coming from the shops and his shop being the only one dark one, a sliver of coldness appeared in his heart. This coldness wasn't anything a fire or technique could help get rid of. This type of coldness came from comprehending the heavens and was a must to experience life. In order to turn into an immortal, one must first turn into a mortal. Although it was easy to turn into mortal, how could it be that easy? Right now, Wang Lin was experiencing loneliness. He knew that he needed to keep experiencing it. This loneliness was nothing compared to years later, when everyone he knows dies one by one until he is the only one left. That is true loneliness, Wang Lin began to ponder. After a long time, he stood up. It seemed as if he had just aged a lot. He slowly picked up the chair, went back into the shop, and slowly closed the door. After a long time, a fire lit up inside the shop. Although this fire looked like all the other shop's fires, this one was hollow, and a deep sense of loneliness hid inside it. Wang Lin sat next to the fire. It was very warm inside the shop, but his heart became even colder. After pondering for a long time, Wang Lin took out a wood carving and put it beside him. This was a carving of his father. Looking at the carving, the coldness in Wang Lin's heart lessened a bit. He then took out the carving of his mother. Then, he gradually took out carvings one by one and placed them near the fireplace. There were carvings of males and females, young people and old people. All of them were residents of the small village. Looking at these carvings, Wang Lin let out a smile. Although this smile was filled with satisfaction, if anyone were to see the smile, they would have said, "How is that a smile?" It is clearly a silent cry. The fire flickered, sometimes lighting Wang Lin's face, sometimes making it dim. When the light reached the wood carvings, they gave off a strange feeling. He gently grabbed each carving as the coldness lessened in his heart. Although the coldness lessened, his sadness grew. Wang Lin muttered to himself, "Can't let it go, can't let it go." In his early years of cultivation, he couldn't let go of his family. Even now, he still couldn't let them go. But this type of feeling was different from back then. In order to turn into an immortal, he first must turn into a mortal. If he had let go of all of his emotions toward his family, then there would be no way for him to turn into a mortal. Every soul formation cultivator was strong not only because of their cultivation, but also because their hearts hid a tiny bit of emotion deep down. They used this bit of emotion to break through the nascent soul stage and reach the soul formation stage. It was because of this emotion that Wang Lin didn't meet with any difficulty turning into a mortal and gradually began to feel like a mortal. At the moment, he was immersed in thoughts about his parents and silently experiencing this feeling. The spiritual energy in his body started to wildly surge again. This spiritual energy gradually came out of his body. Slivers of spiritual energy came out from all of the wood carvings in the room and swirled along with Wang Lin's spiritual energy. Gradually, the swirl of spiritual energy spun even faster and expanded to outside the shop. When the snowflakes fell on the roof of the shop, they began to swirl as well. They soon turned into swirls of snowflakes and flew off into the distance. The snow started to come down harder and harder. Gradually, Wang Lin began to awaken, and when he awakened, a crack had appeared on some of the wood carvings. Although these wood carvings gained a crack, their spiritual pressure became even stronger. Even their quality increased. Wang Lin took a look and took a deep breath. He stood up, then pushed open the door. A cold wind mixed with snow hit his face. He looked up into the sky and whispered, "Soul formation, I, Wang Lin, will obtain it, no matter what." The snow started to fall even harder and a thick layer of snow started to gather on the ground. At this moment, the door to the ironworks shop opposite of Wang Lin suddenly opened. Nyo and his father were about to leave when they saw Wang Lin standing there. They couldn't help but be startled. Nyo ran through the snow, making crunching sounds with each step. He arrived next to Wang Lin and shouted, "Uncle Wang, did you know we were going to come?" With that, he entered the room and sat next to the fire. Nyo's father carried a wooden basket and smiled, "Brother Wang, you're not busy?" Wang Lin faintly smiled as he moved aside and said, "I'm not busy. Come and talk inside." Nyo's father entered the room. He looked at the carvings in the room and revealed a look of envy. He placed the wooden basket on the ground, then rubbed his hands. He wanted to say something, but didn't know how to start. At that moment, Nyo, who was next to the fire, saw the carvings of Wang Lin's parents and suddenly shouted, "Uncle Wang, how come I have never seen these carvings before? Did you make them recently?" Wang Lin closed the door. He then sat down and said, "I made them a while ago." Nyo carefully looked at the wood carvings and asked, "Uncle Wang, who are these carvings of?" Wang Lin's eyes revealed a look of nostalgia and slowly said, "They are my family." Nyo was startled and no longer kept asking. He walked to the basket and opened it up. Inside were 3 plates of exquisite dishes and 2 jugs of fruit wine. Wang Lin took a look and let out a faint smile as he looked at Nyo's father. He had known this man for a long time and this was the first time Wang Lin had seen him like this. Clearly, Daenyo's father had come to ask for his help, but didn't know how to ask. Wang Lin said, "Brother Seng, if you have anything to say, just say it." Daenyo's father hesitated for a bit. He rubbed his hands and awkwardly said, "Nothing, nothing." Daenyo looked at the dishes in the basket. He swallowed hard and his hand reached in. When he noticed his father giving him the look, he quickly pulled his hand back out and disgruntledly said, "It is only borrowing some silver. What's so embarrassing about it?" Daenyo's father's face suddenly turned red and he scolded his son. "Little brat, wait until we are home." Daenyo stuck out his tongue and said, "Since father won't say it, I'll say it. Mother wants to buy the shop next to ours to make our shop bigger, but doesn't have enough money." Daenyo's father let out a sigh. He looked at Wang Lin and helplessly said, "Brother Wang, your sister-in-law thinks our shop is too small and limits the business we can do. She saw that old Li's shop is for rent, so she wanted to immediately rent it." Wang Lin faintly nodded. He picked up the jug of wine from the basket and drank a gulp, then said, "How much do you need?" Daenyo's father hesitated for a while and said, "The shop is pretty big and we have to pay 2 years' rent at once, so it would be 50 pieces of silver. 30 pieces of silver is enough." Daenyo pouted and whispered, "Mother clearly said 80 pieces of silver." Before he could finish, his father shot him another vicious stare. Wang Lin nodded. Without a word, he stood up and walked into the back room. There was a basket there filled with gold and silver. Wang Lin casually picked up some gold and placed it before Daenyo's father. When Daenyo's father saw the piece of gold, he was startled and quickly said, "I don't need this much. Brother Wang, quickly take it back. I only want to borrow 30 pieces of silver." From his point of view, there were at least 10 pieces of gold in front of him, far more than he needed. Wang Lin picked up the jug of wine and smiled, "Brother Seng, I'm not lending you this money. This is money for wine. From now on, I'd like to buy a jug of your fruit wine every day. That money for 10 years of fruit wine is worth it." Daenyo's father hesitated for a bit. His face revealed an excited expression. He said, "Brother Wang, this." Daenyo rolled his eyes and said, "Dad, just take it. Uncle Wang can sell one wood carving for 10 pieces of gold." Daenyo's father stared at Daenyo again. He picked up the jug, took a large gulp, then said, "Brother Wang, what's 10 years or 8 years? As long as you live here, I'll send you a jug of wine every day." Wang Lin chuckled. Looking at the father and son before him, his heart was no longer cold. He now felt a tiny bit of warmth. That night, Daenyo's father drank a lot. 2 jugs were clearly not enough. Daenyo served them on the side and it wasn't until the 10th jug that they had drank enough. Finally, Daenyo's father passed out from drinking, but his hand tightly held onto the gold as he was being carried back by Daenyo. Before they left, Daenyo quietly said to Wang Lin, "Uncle Wang, we have a lot of this wine. My dad won't let me tell other people, but in truth, there are many large pots of wine in the basement of our house, and it is said that there are even more buried deep down. If it wasn't for the fact that father refuses to sell the wine, mother wouldn't have made him come here to borrow money." This video will end here. Thank you for watching.